Her eyes ached from ancient ink and sleepless nights. Ilara was a young scholar who had spent years searching for answers in dusty city archives. But the more she learned, the emptier she felt. It was a deep weariness no amount of sleep could cure. One afternoon, surrounded by towering piles of books that offered no comfort, she made a choice that would change everything. She decided to risk her entire reputation and follow a faded rumor about a place called the Eternal Library, a sanctuary said to offer not just knowledge, but true, soul-deep rest. This journey is about finding peace when you have forgotten what it feels like. By the end, you will understand how to create a small sanctuary of calm in your own life, no matter how chaotic the world becomes. We will uncover what it truly means to let go of the burdens that exhaust you, and how a single act of courage can open a door you never knew was there. I would love to know, where are you listening from right now, and what is the local time for you as we begin this journey together? What is the one thing you would be willing to leave behind to find a moment of true peace? Her last silver locket felt cool and weighty in her palm as she placed it on the cartographer's work table. Master Thuron was a man whose eyes seemed to hold more constellations than the night sky, and he studied her not with greed, but with a deep, quiet sorrow. He did not want her trinket, he told her, but he would accept it as a token of her commitment. For 3 days and nights, Ilara sat with him in his cluttered tower room, the air rich with the scent of old paper and ozone, while he taught her to read the map not with her eyes, but with her spirit. The lines and symbols were not coordinates, he explained, but a representation of an inner landscape. The library would not appear to someone who merely wanted to possess its secrets, only to one who genuinely wished to lay down their burdens. This revelation struck Ilara with the force of a sudden shift in the air. Her entire life had been a quest to acquire, to understand, to win arguments in scholarly debates. The idea of seeking not knowledge but peace felt like a quiet undoing of her very identity. A corrosive doubt whispered that this was all an elaborate fantasy, a final disappointment for a failed academic. What if she surrendered her skepticism only to find nothing but empty air and the echo of her own foolishness, left with neither her locket nor her pride? Yet, the memory of that soul-deep weariness was a more powerful truth than any her doubt could muster. In an act that felt like releasing a part of herself, she closed her eyes, quieted the clamoring questions in her mind, and simply focused on the feeling of release, of letting go. She meditated on the first symbol, a simple spiral that represented the beginning of all things, and as she did, a warm, golden light began to pulse beneath her eyelids. A wave of profound calm washed over her, so foreign and welcome that it brought tears to her eyes. But the moment the light solidified, a sharp wave of dizziness followed, as if the act of accepting this peace had required a tangible piece of her own energy. The cost was real. Before her, the air itself shimmered and parted, a glowing archway of woven light forming out of nothingness. The first gate was open. As she stared into its brilliant, shifting core, a single thought crystallized amidst her awe and fatigue. If the beginning demanded so much, what would the journey itself require of her? The air beyond the archway tasted of rain-washed stone and old parchment. Ilara stepped into a corridor of soft, swirling mist, her heart hammering against her ribs. The enchanted satchel on her shoulder, filled with every research note and theory she had ever compiled, suddenly felt like a lead weight, its strap digging into her skin. A deep, resonant hum filled the air, a vibration that seemed to speak directly to her soul. It was not a sound of welcome, but a demand. To proceed, she would have to leave her life's work behind. A cold spike of panic seized her. Without these notes, who was she? She was not Alara the scholar. She was no one, a woman with empty hands and a head full of forgotten arguments. The corridor remained dim, the mist clinging to her like a gentle veil. Her identity was so tightly woven into those pages that the thought of releasing them felt like letting go of her own thoughts. For a long, terrifying moment, she stood perfectly still, caught between the profound weariness that had brought her here and the blinding fear of what came next. Then, with a shuddering breath, she made a choice. Her fingers, trembling, found the worn leather buckle. She unfastened it, the click echoing in the silent space, and let the heavy satchel fall from her shoulder. It met the misty floor without a sound, and as it vanished from sight, a wave of intense anxiety washed over her, so potent it stole her breath. But an instant later, the corridor blossomed with a gentle, golden light. The oppressive mist cleared, and a physical sensation of weightlessness flowed through her, as if she had been carrying an anchor she never knew was there. The path before her solidified into a beautiful bridge of polished, dark wood, arching over a tranquil, star-filled abyss. A soft, whispering wind curled around her, its voice not in words, but in pure feeling. It carried a warning, a sense that this was only the first release, and that deeper challenges would ask for even more of her carefully maintained control. As Alara stepped onto the bridge, its surface firm and warm beneath her feet, a new sound reached her, a gentle and constant rustle, like a million pages turning in a gentle breeze. It was the heartbeat of the library itself, calling her forward. The rustle of pages swelled into a chorus as the bridge ended, depositing Alara into a hall of impossible scale. Books drifted like serene, leather-bound jellyfish through the warm air, their covers softly glowing. Each volume emitted a unique whisper, a subtle emotional resonance rather than spoken words. One felt like a quiet sigh of contentment, another like the thrill of a forgotten memory. Her scholar's mind ignited, scrambling to identify genres, authors, and historical periods, desperate to impose a logical system upon the beautiful chaos. The whispers became a confusing cacophony, the peace she had felt moments ago threatening to dissolve into academic frustration. She closed her eyes, fighting the urge to categorize. This was a test, she realized, not of her intellect, but of her willingness to feel. She took a slow breath, silencing the internal librarian that demanded order, and simply listened. She let the whispers wash over her, not as data to be processed, but as music to be felt. One gentle murmur, carrying the scent of damp earth and the image of unfurling petals, called to her. It whispered of lost gardens. Without a second thought, she reached out, her fingers brushing the soft, worn cover. The moment she made contact, the hall of whispers vanished. She stood in a sun-dappled glade, surrounded by flowers and colors she had no name for. A profound, cellular quiet settled over her. The constant, low-level anxiety that had been her companion for years simply melted away, replaced by a warmth that felt like coming home. The vision faded after a few heartbeats, leaving her feeling clearer and more centered than she had in a decade. Emboldened, she reached for another book, this one pulsing with a sharper, more insistent energy. Its whisper was one of righteous anger. The instant her skin touched its spine, a jolt of disorienting energy shot up her arm, a brief, startling sensation to her spirit. She pulled her hand back, the unpleasant feeling a stark reminder that not all knowledge here was meant for solace, and that her intuition was her only reliable guide. Shaken but wiser, the memory of the glade a solid warmth in her chest, she knew she was ready. She moved with new purpose through the floating literature, her goal now clear, to find the legendary resting nook, a place where the library's comfort was said to be most concentrated. The floating books parted like a gentle curtain, revealing a figure of pure, shimmering light that barred the entrance to a softly glowing archway. This was the guardian of stillness, its form shifting like sunlight on water, and it spoke without sound, its message flowing directly into Alara's mind. To pass, she must sit upon the stone floor and remain in absolute silence for a count of 100 heartbeats. It sounded simple, but as she settled onto the cool stone, the true challenge began. The silence was not peaceful. It was a vacuum that her mind rushed to fill with a chorus of worries. Unanswered letters, echoes from old conversations, and a long list of unfinished tasks, all clamored for attention, each thought a flicker of mental unrest. Her body twitched with the urge to move, to speak, to break the unbearable quiet. This was a fierce internal war against her own restless nature. She felt a surge of frustration, a desire to stand up and declare the task impossible. But then she remembered the weightlessness of releasing her satchel, the profound quiet of the lost garden. She made a conscious decision, anchoring herself not in the storm of her thoughts, but in the simple, physical rhythm of her breath. With each inhalation and exhalation, she visualized each distracting thought as a leaf floating down a calm river, acknowledging its presence, but letting it pass without grabbing hold. The noise in her head slowly began to recede, and in its place, a deep, resonant calm started to settle within her, a quiet so profound it felt like a new sense. When she opened her eyes at the 100th beat of her heart, the guardian had condensed its light into a single, luminous key that floated into her waiting hand. A final, silent communication flowed from the being. "You have learned to still your own spirit," it seemed to say. True rest, however, is found not only in solitude, but in community. To fully claim your peace, you must now help another lost soul find theirs within these walls. The key felt warm and alive in her palm, a tool not just for a door, but for a purpose. With a newfound determination guiding her steps, Alara turned from the archway, her senses sharpened, ready to seek out someone else adrift in the library's infinite wisdom. A flicker of jagged, distressed light caught her eye deep within the history shelves. There, a young man named Kale was frantically tracing the words in a massive tome on forgotten battles, his entire form vibrating with a desperate energy. His fear was a palpable force, a chaotic wave that slammed into Alara's newfound calm. The serene quiet she had cultivated in the Hall of Whispers began to fracture under the assault of his panic. Her own heart started to race in sympathy, a cold dread whispering that his struggle could become her own, that this sacred peace was fragile and could be stolen away. For a challenging moment, the choice was stark: retreat into self-preservation, or lean into a compassion that might cost her everything. She took a slow, deliberate breath, anchoring herself against the rising tide of her own anxiety. Her voice was soft but firm as she spoke to him, cutting through his frantic muttering. He barely glanced at her, his eyes wide with a hunted look. Her first attempt to calm him failed completely. His fear was a fortress. The temptation to turn away, to protect the precious stillness she had earned, was immense. But the memory of the Guardian's key, warm in her hand, and its message about community, held her fast. This was the purpose the library had asked of her. She made a decision. She would not offer him complex wisdom from the floating books. She would offer him the one, simple tool that had saved her. She sat beside him on the floor, ignoring the frantic energy he emitted, and began to demonstrate the breathing technique the Guardian of Stillness had taught her. Inhale, hold, exhale. She was sharing a part of her own hard-won solace, a piece of her peace. At first, Kale resisted, his breathing shallow and ragged. But slowly, watching her steady rhythm, he began to mimic her. His frantic light started to steady, softening from a piercing white to a calmer gold. As the tension drained from his shoulders, he looked at her with clear, grateful eyes. He confessed then, his voice a hushed whisper, that a shadowy presence, an echo of anxiety, had been stalking him through the stacks. It fed on his fears, he explained, making it impossible for him to find any rest, twisting every historical lesson into a personal omen of impending challenge. This was no mere personal failing. It was a tangible presence within the library's walls, something that sought out troubled souls. Their situation had suddenly escalated from a chance encounter to a shared mission. United by this common challenge, they knew that fleeting moments of calm were not enough. To secure their safety and claim the true rest the library promised, they would have to be brave. They would have to find the source of the echo itself. The corridor of drifting books gave way to a circular chamber where the air itself seemed to hum with shifting pressures. At its center, floating just above a simple stone pedestal, was the map of inner weather. It was not a drawing on parchment, but a living, three-dimensional model of the entire library, sculpted from gently swirling mist. Clear, calm zones shone with soft gold light, while others pulsed with the deep indigo of contemplation. But one area, deep in the archives, was a seething mass of dark violet and angry gray, a storm cloud crackling with jagged light. The echo was not just a feeling, it was a tangible turbulence on this emotional cartography, and it was centered directly over a place the map labeled the Chamber of Regrets. Kale flinched as if struck, his hard-won calm shattering. "No," he whispered, his voice tight. "Not there. We have to go back. We can find another way." Alara understood his fear was a physical wall. To ask him to enter that chamber was to ask him to walk directly into the heart of his own experience. She placed a steadying hand on his arm, her own heart aching for him. "Fleeing will only let the storm grow," she said softly, her gaze fixed on the turbulent map. "The echo feeds on what we refuse to face. It grows stronger in the shadows. If we run, it will only find you again, and next time, it may be even more powerful." Her words were not a command, but a quiet statement of a difficult truth. She knew logic alone would not move him. It was an act of faith. She raised the luminous key the guardian had given her. Its warm light pulsed in rhythm with her own heartbeat. This was not just for a door, she realized, but for a deeper layer of understanding. She touched the key to the edge of the misty map. Instantly, the model shifted, the colors deepening. The dark storm over the Chamber of Regrets now swirled with alarming speed, its edges lashing out like tendrils. The visualization was unmistakable. The emotional turmoil was intensifying, and with it, the echo's influence was spreading. Their window for a peaceful resolution was closing. Kale watched the storm expand, a grim resolve slowly replacing the panic in his eyes. He gave a single, sharp nod. Together, they turned from the map and moved deeper into the archives, the air growing thick and heavy, as if weighted with 1,000 unspoken feelings. The air in the Chamber of Regrets was thick and cold, tasting of dust and dried tears. All around them, floating in the still air, were softly glowing orbs, each one a captured moment of personal reflection. They pulsed with faint, sorrowful light, and the entire room hummed with a low, collective ache. Kale froze just inside the entrance, his breath catching. His gaze was locked on one specific orb, darker than the others, which seemed to pull at him with a terrible gravity. "This is it," he whispered, his voice hollow. I let it all just fade away. I was so focused on my own ambitions that I watched a friendship I cherished simply wither from neglect. He was paralyzed, not by fear, but by a deep, consuming feeling that made him unworthy of even attempting to mend what was broken. Ilara felt the weight of his sorrow pressing against her own spirit, a temptation to absorb his pain and make it her own. But she remembered the Guardian's lesson about holding her own stillness. She did not try to tell him it was okay, or that his feelings were wrong. Instead, she stood beside him, a steady, calm presence, and spoke with quiet conviction. "You do not have to carry this forever," she said, "but to put it down, you must first fully acknowledge its weight. The choice to lift it is yours alone." Her words were not a push, but an invitation to courage. Kale took a shuddering breath, his hand trembling as he reached out. His fingers made contact with the cool, smooth surface of the dark orb. The moment he touched it, the chamber shimmered. A ghostly image of a young man with a kind, familiar smile materialized before them, a silent, poignant echo of the friend he had lost. Kale's composure broke. Tears streamed down his face as he looked at the apparition. "I am so sorry," he began, his voice cracking under the strain of the long-held apology. "I was selfish and blind. I thought there would always be more time, and I let my pride keep me from reaching out. I am so sorry I let you go." He did not make excuses. He simply accepted the full responsibility for his inaction, speaking the truth that had been held in silence for years. As the final word left his lips, the dark orb in his hand dissolved into a shower of soft, golden light. The ghostly image of his friend smiled warmly one last time before fading away. A palpable shift occurred in the room. The oppressive, cold weight lifted, and the hum of sorrow quieted to a whisper. The echo of anxiety, which had been a menacing pressure at the edge of their awareness, recoiled and diminished, its power over Kale severed at its source. But the effort had cost him everything. Kale slumped to his knees, emotionally spent and vulnerable, the act of release leaving him hollowed out and fragile. The immediate challenge was gone, but his spirit was now a quiet, open space. Ilara gently helped him to his feet, supporting his weight. She thought of the warm, floating books in the Hall of Whispers and the profound peace of the resting nooks the library promised. He did not need another lesson or a challenging trial. He needed a safe harbor, a place where his newly lightened spirit could mend itself in gentle quiet. The luminous key fit perfectly into a lock that seemed to be carved from solidified moonlight. With a soft click, a hidden door swung inward, revealing the nook of gentle repose. The air inside was warm and carried the soothing scent of chamomile and sun-warmed linen. Soft, woven hammocks hung between shelves that pulsed with a gentle, amber light, and the only sound was a quiet, rhythmic hum, like the earth's own heartbeat. Ilara guided the exhausted Kale to the nearest hammock, where he sank into the supportive embrace without a word. Almost instantly, the lines of tension on his face smoothed away, and he fell into a sleep so deep and peaceful, it was like watching a storm-ravaged sea become a still, clear pond. As his breathing settled into a slow, even rhythm, a profound quiet descended upon Ilara. She pulled a small stool close to his hammock and sat, keeping watch. This was the first true stillness she had known since stepping into the library, a quiet born not from a test, but from a conscious choice. The impulse to leave, to finally seek out her own answers in the endless stacks, was a persistent whisper at the back of her mind. Her own weariness was still a real presence, a hollow ache that longed for its own cure. To stay felt like a delay, a postponement of her own hard-won peace. But as she watched over Kale, seeing the gentle rise and fall of his chest, she understood that this was not an interruption of her journey, but a vital part of it. The library had not asked her to merely find peace for herself, but to understand its nature, and that sometimes peace is found in the act of providing sanctuary for another. She made the decision to stay, to prioritize his fragile recovery over her personal progress. In that moment of selfless choice, the amber light in the nook grew warmer and brighter, the humming sound softening into something that felt like a grateful sigh. The very air seemed to thicken with a protective, nurturing magic, and Ilara felt a distinct, approving warmth settle around her shoulders, a silent affirmation from the library itself that this was the correct path. When Kale finally stirred, his eyes opened clear and focused, the haunted shadows completely gone. He looked at Ilara, who had kept her silent vigil, and a look of deep understanding passed between them. He swung his legs out of the hammock, his movements sure and calm. "I owe you a debt that cannot be measured in knowledge," he said, his voice firm. "You sought the library for a reason. Let me help you find what you truly need. My path is yours now, for as long as you will have me." Their alliance was no longer one of shared fear, but of steadfast purpose. The path beyond the nook of gentle repose was not marked by signs, but by a gradual shift in the air, which grew still and expectant. They entered a vast, circular chamber called the Archive of Unspoken Questions, where the books lining the walls were utterly silent, their covers blank and waiting. These were not records of what was known, but vessels for what was deeply felt, yet never given voice. Kale stood as a quiet sentinel at the entrance, his calm presence a steady anchor in the unnerving quiet. Ilara walked slowly into the center of the room, her footsteps echoing in the profound silence. The emptiness of the books, felt like a mirror of her own deepest uncertainties, and a cold dread began to coil in her stomach. To speak her question aloud would be to make her private vulnerability a public fact, to expose the fragile core of her lifelong ambition. For so long, her identity had been built upon the acquisition of knowledge. To question the very point of that pursuit felt like risking the foundation of her entire self. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of resistance. What if the answer was that her life's work had been meaningless, a selfish hoarding of facts that helped no one? The fear was a physical weight, threatening to seal her lips forever. But then she thought of Kale, peacefully sleeping in the Nook, his spirit mended because she had chosen to stay. She thought of the weightlessness of releasing her satchel and the profound quiet of the Guardian's trial. Each step in this library had asked her to let go of something, and each release had brought her closer to a truth more valuable than any fact. She closed her eyes, took a final, steadying breath, and let the words fall into the waiting silence. What is my purpose beyond collecting knowledge? The question hung in the air, stark and honest. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, a single, pristine book materialized on a reading stand before her. Its cover was pure white, and as she watched, images began to bloom across its pages, not in text, but in soft, glowing pictures. She saw herself sitting with Kale in the history aisle, her calm presence a shield against his storm. She saw herself guiding other lost figures through the halls, not with grand lectures, but with simple, steady compassion. She saw sanctuaries of quiet being cultivated not for her own use, but for others to find their rest. The answer was not a title or a grand destiny. It was a pattern of action, a quiet purpose woven from empathy and support. A profound shift occurred within her. The ambition that had once felt so vast and important now seemed small and solitary. In its place, a new identity settled, that of a facilitator of peace, a guardian of quiet moments. As this acceptance filled her, the book gently closed and floated into her hands, binding itself to her with a soft, warm light. It was now a permanent part of her journey, a guide to this new path. But the final image in the book had not been of peace. It had been a single, alarming illustration of the library's central heartstone, a great crystal that pulsed with the sanctuary's life force, now shone with a dark, spreading crack. The book's final message was a visceral tremor that passed through the very floor beneath their feet. The entire eternal library was weakening, its existence threatened by this fracture at its core. Their personal quest for rest was instantly, irrevocably transformed. Looking at Kale, whose determined gaze met hers with unwavering solidarity, they knew their path was clear. Together, they turned and ran, not away from a challenge, but toward the very heart of the sanctuary. Their mission now expanded from finding peace to preserving it for everyone. The Heartstone chamber was not a room of stone and shelves, but a cavernous space where the very air was woven from strands of light and silence. In its center hung the Heartstone itself, a colossal, multifaceted crystal that pulsed with a slow, steady rhythm, like the heartbeat of the world. But that rhythm was faltering. A deep, jagged crack ran through its core, and with each weak pulse, a little more of its light faded into the surrounding gloom. The sight was overwhelming, a vision of something profoundly fragile. The sheer scale of the challenge washed over them, a wave of uncertainty that threatened to undo the peace they had so carefully nurtured. How could they possibly mend something so fundamental, so vast? The weight of it settled heavily in the sacred quiet. It was Kale who moved first, his voice a low, steady anchor in the swirling unease. "Look," he said, pointing to a massive open book on a pedestal of obsidian that stood before the crystal, the Weeping Atlas. Its pages were not paper, but a shifting, living landscape of light. This was a real-time map of the library's spiritual well-being. Vast sections, once glowing with soft gold and blue, were now faded to a sickly gray, their intricate topographies softening at the edges like mist. The atlas did not show damage from within, but revealed an external influence. Faint, almost invisible threads connected these fading areas to the world outside, carrying echoes of a collective unrest, a relentless tide of anxious thought that was slowly dimming the library's magic. The world had forgotten how to be still, and this sanctuary of silence was paying the price. The realization was sobering. The conflict was not against a monster in the stacks, but against an entire world's emotional state. The pressure was immense, a feeling of smallness that made their own efforts seem modest, but to stand and do nothing was to accept an end to this special place. Ilara met Kale's gaze, a silent understanding passing between them. "We have to try," she whispered. They did not know how to fix the Heartstone, but they could act as temporary supports. Placing their hands on the cool, fading pages of the atlas, they focused every ounce of their hard-won inner calm, pushing it outwards like a gentle wave. They visualized their own peace, flowing down the delicate threads, reinforcing the softening borders. The effort was instantly draining. It felt like pouring their own energy into a deep well, a spiritual weariness that made their knees weak and their minds feel thin. But as they poured their focus into the map, a small, faded section near the Hall of Whispers flickered, then steadied, its gray hue warming to a fragile but stable gold. It was a temporary measure, a small barrier against an ocean of noise, but it proved their actions had meaning. A new line of text shimmered into existence on the atlas page beside their hands. "The fracture can only be healed at the source," it read. "A ritual of mending must be performed within the Heartstone during the quiet hour, when the library's connection to the world is at its most subtle." The quiet hour, the text clarified, was not a measure of clock time, but a fleeting moment of perfect collective calm in the world outside, a rare event that was fast approaching. They had a timeline, pulling their hands back, physically and emotionally spent. They looked from the cracked Heartstone to the steadied section on the map. They had bought a little time, but the true test was yet to come. Their journey was no longer just about finding rest. It was about honoring its very existence. The quiet hour arrived not with a chime, but with a deepening of the silence, a stillness so absolute it felt like the library itself was holding its breath. The Heartstone before them was now a dim, fractured star, its light guttering like a candle in its final moments. Ilara and Kale stepped forward, their footsteps swallowed by the profound quiet. The ritual was deceptively simple in theory. They had to hum a specific, harmonized lullaby, a sequence of notes that would resonate with the crystal's core frequency and coax its energy back into alignment. But as they began, the first challenge became terrifyingly clear. The Heartstone did not accept their song passively. It was a living instrument, and their voices were the keys that would either unlock its healing or shatter it completely. A single waver in pitch, a moment of hesitation, and a sharp, painful feedback would lance through their minds, a psychic static that made their vision blur and their focus fracture. It was not a test of musical talent, but of absolute trust. Ilara's note was a high, clear thread of light, while Kale's was a low, grounding hum of earth. For a few precarious moments, their melodies clashed instead of blended, the discord sending jagged tremors through the air around them. The crystal's crack seemed to widen with each misstep. They were failing. The immense pressure to perform perfectly was itself the greatest obstacle, each of them trying so hard to control their own part that they were tearing the whole song apart. In a moment of shared desperation, their eyes met across the shimmering crystal. No words were needed. The choice was clear. They had to surrender individual control and become a single instrument. They synchronized their breathing, their chests rising and falling as one, and let go of the fear of a wrong note. Ilara leaned into Kale's foundational tone, trusting him to hold the rhythm, while Kale wove his voice around the clarity of hers. Their separate melodies fused into one seamless, resonant wave of sound that washed over the Heartstone. The effect was instantaneous and breathtaking. The great crystal pulsed, once, twice, then erupted in a cascade of pure, white light that flowed like liquid starfire into the fracture, sealing it with a soft, final chime. The light did not stop there. It radiated outwards in a visible wave, rushing through the chamber and beyond, into every corridor and reading nook. The entire library shimmered, the air itself thickening with renewed magic, the colors of the floating books brightening, the very silence feeling richer and more profound. They had done it, but the cost of such a magnificent mending was immediate and total. As the last note faded from their lips, the energy drained from their bodies, leaving them both sinking to their knees, utterly spent. They were hollowed out, magically exhausted, their minds and spirits pushed to their absolute limit. It was in this state of complete vulnerability, as the triumphant light of the Heartstone slowly faded to a gentle, steady glow, that a new presence made itself known. A figure emerged from the shadows, not as a sudden apparition, but as if they had always been there, a part of the library's own quiet. This was the head librarian. The head librarian was not an old woman, but an ancient one, her form woven from the same quiet light that filled the Heartstone. Her name was Lyra, and her eyes held the patient depth of countless turning pages. She did not congratulate them. Instead, she posed a question that hung in the newly restored silence, a choice that felt heavier than any challenge they had yet faced. "You have proven yourselves worthy not as seekers, but as stewards," she said, her voice the soft rustle of a cherished book opening. "You may remain here as permanent guardians of this sanctuary. You will know eternal peace, free from the weariness of the world outside." The offer was a siren song, a promise of the very rest Ilara had crossed worlds to find. To stay meant safety, an endless, gentle dream within these hallowed walls, but the cost was absolute, a final, silent farewell to everything and everyone they had ever known. Ilara felt a sharp, physical pull, a longing so deep it was an ache. Her old life, with its dusty archives and lonely ambitions, seemed a pale shadow next to the vibrant purpose she had found here. Yet, the thought of never again feeling rain on her face or seeing the sun rise over a familiar city skyline sent a surprising pang through her. It was not her old life she mourned, but its potential for connection, now that she understood what true connection meant. Beside her, Kale shifted uneasily. The responsibility of guardianship felt like a chain. He had just found his freedom from a past that had shaped him. The idea of binding himself to a single, eternal duty, no matter how peaceful, felt like trading one kind of confinement for another. His concern was not of the library, but of the finality. In that charged silence, their eyes met. No words passed between them, but a full conversation unfolded in that single glance. A shared understanding that the library's peace was not meant to be hoarded, but shared, that their greatest service was not in hiding from a weary world, but in carrying a piece of this sanctuary back into it. Together, they turned back to Lyra. "We are grateful," Alara said, her voice steady with a conviction that surprised her. "But our place is not only within these walls. Our purpose is to be a bridge." Kale nodded, his own resolve firming. "The world needs this peace more than we need to escape it." Lyra's ageless face broke into a slow, radiant smile, as if she had been waiting for this exact refusal for a very long time. "Your choice is the final and most important lesson," she said. "The library does not exist to separate the wise from the world, but to weave wisdom back into its fabric. To that end, I grant you a great honor and a greater responsibility." She reached out, and with a touch to each of their foreheads, imprinted not a map, but a feeling, a deep, internal compass that would always guide them back to the library's threshold when their spirits were truly ready to return. "You are now its guides, its messengers. You will learn to recognize other weary souls, and you will know how to help them find their own path here." The weight of the honor settled upon them, not as a burden, but as a mantle of purpose. Their personal quest was over, but their shared work was just beginning. Standing side by side in the glowing aftermath, their bond felt unbreakable. A partnership forged in silence and sealed by a promise to a world that had forgotten how to rest. Lyra's hands, formed of light and shadow, extended toward them. For Alara, she offered a small, smooth crystal that pulsed with a gentle, internal warmth. For Kale, a slender bookmark woven from what looked like solidified moonlight. "These are not simple tokens," she explained, "but tools for the journey ahead." The crystal, when held with clear intention, can create a small, protective zone of quiet calm, a portable piece of the library's sanctuary. The bookmark, when placed between the pages of any text, even a simple note, will allow its holder to recall any peaceful memory with perfect, stabilizing clarity. The reality of their departure settled over them then, a bittersweet feeling that was like leaving a piece of their own spirits behind. This place had been more than a refuge. It had been a teacher that remade them from the inside out. Alara's voice was thick with emotion as she spoke their shared promise. "We will honor your wisdom. We will carry this peace with us." Lyra's gaze was both proud and sorrowful. "The world you return to will not understand this quiet," she warned. "It will test you, its noise and haste, constantly pressing against the calm you now carry. You must be vigilant, for the echo you faced here has countless cousins in the world outside, and they feed on forgotten stillness." With a final, respectful bow, Alara and Kale turned and walked back through the gates of woven light. The transition was not a gentle fade, but a sudden, visceral shift. The profound, nurturing silence of the library was instantly replaced by the distant, chaotic hum of a waking city, the air now thin and sharp in their lungs. The weight of their task settled onto their shoulders, a tangible responsibility. Yet as their eyes met, a light-hearted hope bloomed in their chests, a quiet counter-melody to the burden. They were not just returning to the world, they were returning to it with a purpose, and they were not going back alone. The city's roar hit them like a physical blow. After the library's profound silence, the cacophony of rattling carts, shouting merchants, and clattering footsteps was a disorienting assault. Elara flinched, her hand instinctively flying to the warm crystal in her pocket. Kale's shoulders tensed, his jaw tightening as the collective anxiety of the crowd washed over them, a chaotic tide they could now perceive as a tangible force. It was a constant, low-grade hum of unrest that threatened to seep into their bones and unravel the hard-won calm they carried within. The urge to rush, to snap at a jostling stranger, to let their own thoughts spiral into worry, was a powerful, familiar pull. It would be so easy to fall back into the old rhythms, to let the world's haste become their own once more. Their eyes met in a moment of shared struggle, and without a word, Kale reached out, his hand finding Elara's. His grip was firm, a silent promise of solidarity. They released the contact after only a heartbeat, but the connection held, an invisible thread tethering them to their purpose. Turning as one, they moved with deliberate slowness against the river of hurried bodies, heading toward the city's main square. Now, their vision seemed altered. They saw past the surface of the crowd, perceiving the subtle signs of inner weariness they had once warned themselves. They noticed the merchant's tight smile as he haggled, the student's frantic pace, while muttering rehearsed arguments, the dull exhaustion in a mother's eyes as she tried to soothe a fussy infant. The scale of the need was overwhelming, a vast ocean of disquiet, and they were but two people with a small crystal and a bookmark. Their work, they understood, was not some future mission. It had already begun. Then, a sharp, panicked cry cut through the general din, pulling their focus like a magnet. Near a splashing fountain, a little girl stood utterly alone, her small frame trembling as she scanned the unfamiliar faces swirling around her. Tears streamed down her cheeks, her rising sobs a tiny, concentrated echo of the world's larger distress. This was not a grand challenge, but a simple, human moment of fear. It was their first real test. Elara was on her knees in an instant, the rough cobblestones pressing through her trousers. She did not reach for the sobbing girl, but instead held out her open palm, where the small crystal pulsed with its gentle, internal warmth. Her voice was a soft murmur, a lullaby woven not from words, but from the very feeling of the library's quiet. The child's terrified sobs hitched, her wide, wet eyes locked on the softly glowing stone. A tiny circle of unnatural calm settled over them, muting the city's roar to a distant whisper. Just a few paces away, Kale stood with his eyes closed, his focus turning inward. He was not searching the crowd with his eyes, but with his spirit, using the clarity he had earned in the Chamber of Regrets to sift through the frantic emotional signatures around him. He found it almost immediately, a sharp, piercing note of maternal panic, cutting through the general noise. He moved with a quiet purpose, gently parting the gathering onlookers to guide a weeping, frantic woman toward the fountain. The moment the mother's eyes found her daughter, the air itself seemed to sigh with relief. Their reunion was a small, bright flame of pure joy in the gray square. A few bystanders who had been watching with suspicion felt their own tight shoulders relax, their hurried thoughts slowing for just a moment as an inexplicable wave of peace washed over them. It was a tiny ripple, but it was real. Alara and Kale did not try to hide what they had done. They stood together, their calm a quiet declaration in the midst of the city's chaos. This open trust was their first conscious decision in their new role, a belief that the world was ready for small miracles. The act proved their mission was not a fantasy. It was tangible, and it worked. But such a visible display of unusual tranquility could not go unnoticed for long. As the grateful mother swept her child into her arms, a city watchman shouldered his way through the dispersing crowd. His face was set in a permanent scowl of weary cynicism. His eyes narrowed not with malice, but with a deep-seated suspicion of anything that disrupted the predictable disorder of his patrol. He had seen the strange calm, he had seen the glowing stone, and he now fixed his skeptical gaze squarely on the two strangers who seemed utterly unbothered by the city's relentless pace. His heavy, deliberate steps signaled the end of their brief moment of triumph and the beginning of their first true challenge in the wider world. Captain Bren's shadow fell over them, a long and imposing shape that seemed to swallow the small pocket of calm they had created. His voice was a low rumble, worn smooth by years of street-level disputes. "Explain yourselves," he demanded, his gaze flicking from Alara's face to the now dulled crystal in her hand. "That was no simple comfort you offered. What manner of approach did you use on that child?" The question hung in the air, a direct challenge to the very nature of their purpose. Alara met his skeptical stare, her own expression serene. She did not flinch or offer a hasty defense. "We used no hidden method, Captain," she said, her voice even and clear. "We offered a moment of quiet, a practice from a place we have been, called the Eternal Library. It is not a location on any map you know, but a state of being one can learn to carry within." She spoke of it not as a secret to be kept, but as a skill, like learning to breathe deeply when the world feels too loud. Captain Bren listened, his arms crossed, his expression a mask of pure, unyielding logic. "A library of quiet," he repeated, the words tasting foreign and impractical on his tongue. "You expect me to believe you calmed a terrified child, and half this square with a story about a silent library." His world was built on evidence and observable fact, on laws and the hard edges of reality. This talk of inner landscapes and carried peace sounded like the kind of fanciful tale used to distract from more concrete mischief. The friction between their worldviews was palpable, a quiet tension between wonder and weary cynicism. Yet Alara and Kale held their ground with a gentle conviction that was more disarming than any argument. They did not preach or try to force him to understand. They simply were what they claimed to be, living examples of the peace they described. Their calm was not a performance, but a deep, unshakable truth, and that, more than any explanation, gave the captain pause. He could not detain them for being strangely tranquil, nor for telling a peculiar story. There was no law against peace. With a grunt of reluctant dismissal, he lowered his hands. "I find your tale difficult to accept," he stated flatly, "but I find no crime in it today. You are free to go." However, his final words were a clear warning, a promise of future scrutiny. Do not think this is the end of my inquiry. I will be watching. The moment he turned and strode away, the pressure of his suspicion lifted, but the weight of his observation remained. They had passed their first test in the open world, not by winning him over, but by refusing to be drawn into conflict. His wary eye was now a part of their journey, a representative of the questioning world they hoped to gently persuade. Undeterred, they turned from the bustling square, their resolve strengthened. A fleeting moment in a public space was not enough. To truly share their message, they would need a foundation, a quiet hearth from which their small flame of peace could grow. The city archives were exactly as Alara had left them, a cavern of dust motes, dancing in slanted light, and the dry, brittle scent of forgotten paper. The familiar weight of academic judgment settled around her shoulders as she walked through the main hall, past former colleagues who offered polite, puzzled nods. She did not ask for a grand lecture hall or a prominent chamber. Instead, she requested the key to a small, Western reading room that had been closed for years, its windows facing the setting sun. Her reputation, earned through years of dedicated scholarship, was the only currency she had, and she spent it on this one modest request. The head archivist, a man whose entire world was catalogued in ink, granted her use of the space with a bemused sigh, viewing it as the peculiar indulgence of a brilliant mind that had finally bent under the weight of too much study. They faced the whispers first, the subtle smirks from scholars who valued citations over compassion. How could a comfortable chair and soft light compete with the hard, cold facts of history? They murmured. It was a conflict of worldviews, a quiet war between the measurable and the meaningful. Alara and Kale did not argue. They simply began their work, leading not with words, but with atmosphere. They cleaned the room until the wooden floors gleamed, arranged a few deeply cushioned chairs in a circle, and placed Kale's moonlight bookmark within the pages of a simple book of poetry. They lit a single beeswax candle whose flame did not flicker in the still air. The first visitor was a young student named Lena, her hands shaking from too much black tea and sleepless anxiety over an upcoming examination. She did not come for answers, but for a place to rest from the pressure. Alara did not offer her study tips or a pep talk. She simply gestured to a chair and sat in silence with her. After a quarter of an hour, the girl's breathing slowed, the frantic energy around her dissolving into the room's gentle embrace. She left without a word, but the look of profound relief in her eyes was a more powerful testimony than any scholarly endorsement. A few more students, drawn by Lena's quiet transformation, began to trickle in, their quiet gratitude a fragile but living proof that the sanctuary was working. This small, steady stream of peaceful moments did not go unnoticed as the city began preparing for its annual Festival of Lanterns, a time meant for reflection and new beginnings. A formal invitation arrived at the dusty archive, addressed to both Alara and Kale. The city council, intrigued by the murmurs of a new kind of quiet wisdom, requested their presence at the festival to share their methods with the wider community. Their small corner of peace was about to be tested under the glow of 1,000 lanterns and the gaze of an entire city. The Festival of Lanterns flooded the city with a river of warm, golden light and a vibrant, chaotic energy. Amidst the music and laughter, Alara and Kale erected a simple tent of undyed linen, an island of quiet at the edge of the celebration. Inside, they placed Alara's crystal at the center of a low table, its gentle pulse washing the space in a soft amber glow. They did not lecture or preach. They simply invited people in, offering to guide them through simple breathing exercises and brief moments of guided quiet. The response was a quiet tide. At first, a trickle of the curious entered, but as word spread of the strange, peaceful tent, hundreds of people began to gather, spilling out into the surrounding area. They sat on mats and blankets, their collective breathing falling into a slow, synchronized rhythm. For a precious hour, a significant portion of the bustling festival grew still, the usual frantic chatter replaced by a shared, joyful calm that felt like a collective sigh of relief. This visible shift did not go unchallenged. A group of stern traditionalists, their faces set in grim disapproval, pushed their way to the front of the crowd. They shouted accusations, calling the practices dangerous nonsense and a disrespectful distraction from the festival's true, time-honored meaning. They tried to disrupt the session with loud arguments, their aggressive energy a sharp contrast to the prevailing peace. Alara and Kale did not raise their voices in return. Instead, Alara stood, her posture open and unthreatened, and spoke directly to the leader of the protesters. Her voice carried clearly over the tension. "Your passion for tradition is understood," she said, "but the greatest traditions are those that help us live better lives. We will not argue with you. Instead, we invite you to sit with us, not to change your mind, but simply to breathe." The offer was so unexpected, so devoid of confrontation, that the protesters' anger faltered. After a moment of stunned silence, a few of them, driven by a mixture of skepticism and sheer curiosity, reluctantly took seats on the offered mats. As the guided meditation resumed, their rigid postures slowly softened, their clenched jaws relaxing. They did not become converts in that moment, but their aggression was completely disarmed, leaving behind a bewildered and thoughtful quiet. The powerful, positive experience of the many people present, combined with this visible easing of tension, began to decisively shift public opinion in their favor. People left the tent not just relaxed, but genuinely inspired, carrying a new idea of peace back into their communities. This success, however, was a beacon that could not be ignored by the city's highest authorities. The next morning, a formal summons sealed with the council's official insignia was delivered to their small reading room. The meeting it demanded would not be about a simple tent at a festival. It would determine whether their work would be endorsed as a public good or silenced as a challenge to the established order. The council chamber was a vast space of polished obsidian and quiet, watchful stillness. Alara and Kale stood on a mosaic floor at its center, facing a semicircle of elevated desks where the city's most influential figures sat. The air was dense with doubt, a tangible presence that made the warmth of Alara's crystal feel like a fading echo. The head counselor, a man named Valerius, with a voice like rough stone, began the proceedings with a demand for clear explanations. "What exactly are these practices you advocate, and by what authority do you claim they serve the common good?" He spoke of order, of predictable results, of things that could be counted and regulated. The question was a barrier, and they had no formal standing to cross it. A serious woman on his right, Counselor Morwen, leaned forward, her gaze sharp. "We have accounts of glowing stones and unusual calm," she stated. "The people's inner lives are not a testing ground for experimental arts. How can we be certain you are not crafting some subtle influence that diminishes personal resolve. The challenge lingered in the air, a direct question aimed at the heart of their purpose. Kale did not waver. He met her eyes, his own calm and direct. There is no art beyond teaching in what we share, only a neglected ability, he answered, his voice carrying a quiet assurance that filled the large room. The stone is a focal point, a simple instrument to remind people of a stillness they already hold but have learned to overlook. We do not direct anyone. We simply assist them in recalling how to navigate their own inner landscape. To illustrate his meaning, he did not debate further. Instead, he gestured to the chamber's great doors, which opened to welcome a small, uncertain group of citizens. Lena, the student, spoke first, her voice gentle but steady, as she shared how the quiet space had helped her approach her exams without being consumed by worry. A merchant followed, describing how a few moments of mindful breathing each morning had softened the constant strain in his posture and deepened his patience with his family. Each account was a plain, human reflection of a better daily experience, not a spectacular wonder, yet words on their own were not sufficient for some counselors. Valerius remained unconvinced, his arms folded. Personal stories are not measured proof, he declared. You have offered me recollections, not verified results. It was then that Alara made her choice. She looked not at the doubtful counselors, but at the whole gathering, her voice softening into a gentle, welcoming tone. The deepest proof is individual understanding, she said. We cannot demonstrate the worth of calm to someone who has never fully known it. Will you permit us to offer you a glimpse? Without waiting for official consent, she started to lead the entire chamber through the same simple breathing pattern they had shared at the festival. Inhale for 4 heartbeats, hold for 4, exhale for 6. At first, the room was full of uneasy movement and questioning looks, but gradually, as the steady rhythm continued, a noticeable change took place. The rigid line of Counselor Morwen's shoulders eased just a little. The restless tapping of another counselor's fingers grew still. The chamber's heavy mood began to lift, the cool air feeling slightly warmer. It was the eldest member, Madame Evandra, who had stayed quiet the whole time, who finally spoke. Her voice was thin with the years, but it held the gravity of long experience. I have served this city for 60 years, she began, her eyes, aged yet keen, resting on Alara and Kale. In all that time, I have witnessed many answers proposed for the people's fatigue, from tighter rules to larger celebrations. I have never felt the city's unrest settle in this room until now. I sense the truth within your shared quiet. The chamber grew utterly silent. Valerius appeared as if he wished to object, but the visible shift among his peers was unmistakable. After a long, strained moment of quiet thought, Madame Evandra suggested a middle path. We will allow you a trial period of 1 year, she stated. You may proceed with your efforts, but under the Council's formal review. You must record your activities and share observations on the felt influence. This is not an approval, but an inquiry. The gavel fell, marking their situation with a clear sound that resonated in the newly settled air. They had escaped being stopped, but the expectation was now immense. They had 1 year to transform individual moments of tranquility into an observable common benefit, with every move observed by their most powerful doubters. Leaving the chamber, the weight of the city's watchful attention felt greater than any challenge the library had ever presented. The haven's door opened not to a crowd, but to 3 hesitant figures outlined against the morning light. There was Finn, a scribe whose hand trembled from copying endless legal scrolls, his mind a tangled knot of deadlines. Then came Anya, a baker whose ovens never cooled, her eyes shadowed by a relentless cycle of work and sleeplessness. And finally, Leo, a city guard whose nightly patrols left him perpetually on edge, his body coiled like a spring. They were the first to answer the quiet call, not for a miracle, but for a method. The initial sessions were a struggle against deeply ingrained habits. Finn fidgeted, his mind racing to categorize the breathing exercises instead of experiencing them. Anya kept mentally reviewing her baking schedule, the serenity of the room feeling like a betrayal of her responsibilities. Leo found the stillness itself threatening, his training screaming that lowered vigilance meant danger. Progress was not a sudden awakening, but a series of tiny, hard-won victories. The day Finn realized his hand had steadied without a conscious thought. The morning Anya slept through the night for the first time in a year. The moment Leo recognized a tense situation without his pulse immediately spiking. These small successes became the Haven's most powerful testimony. Their transformed presence in the city, calmer and more focused, did more than any poster or proclamation ever could. Captain Bren, ever watchful, saw this subtle shift as a potential threat to discipline. He dispatched one of his own, a young guard named Rylon, whose anxiety was an open secret among the ranks. His orders were clear: observe and report on the activities within the Haven. The atmosphere shifted palpably the day Rylon arrived in his official uniform, his posture rigid and his eyes darting, a living embodiment of the council's scrutiny. Elara and Kale did not treat him as a spy. They welcomed him with the same gentle compassion they offered the scribe and the baker, handing him a cup of tea and inviting him to simply sit. They made no special effort to convince him, trusting the practice itself to be its own argument. For Rylon, the act of setting aside his role as an observer and becoming a participant was the most difficult barrier. The first time he attempted the stillness exercise, a wave of overwhelming worry seized him, the quiet amplifying every fearful thought about failing his duty. But instead of judgment, he met only understanding. Kale sat with him in silence until the wave passed, a steady, non-threatening presence. Slowly, session by session, the armor of his anxiety began to soften. The transformation was profound. The guard who had arrived as a tense informant became one of the Haven's most dedicated students, then its most unexpected advocate. He began speaking openly to his fellow guards about the value of a calm mind in de-escalating conflicts, his own newfound steadiness a living example. This created a quiet rift within the watch itself, a divide between those who saw this inner work as a strength and those, like Captain Bren, who viewed it as a weakening of necessary edge. Rylon's sincere endorsement, coming from within the very structure that had doubted them, began to turn the tide of public opinion. When a former skeptic in a guard's uniform speaks of peace as a practical tool, people who would never listen to a scholar or a mystic start to take notice. The Haven was no longer just a quiet room, it was becoming a quiet revolution. The city plunged into a sudden and profound darkness, the Festival of Lanterns, a fading memory replaced by a deep and startling quiet. Every lamp and hearth fire flickered and faded at once, a collective gasp of surprise rising from thousands of throats. The haven's door, usually a symbol of gentle invitation, was nearly pushed from its frame by a wave of citizens seeking refuge from the overwhelming blackness outside. The air in the small room grew thick with the scent of cold air and rising concern, a chaotic energy that pressed against the edges of Alara and Kale's hard-won calm. For one heart-stopping moment, their own peace wavered. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic rhythm whispering that they were not enough, that this was too vast, that their small sanctuary might break and become part of the turmoil. Kale felt the old and familiar urge to push his way out, to meet the confusion with force. If they lost their center now, the worry in this room would spill outwards, turning a simple blackout into a city-wide crisis. Their eyes met across the concerned crowd, a silent question and an answer passing between them in an instant. They did not shout for order. Instead, they moved to the center of the room, their backs touching, a single point of stability in the swirling unease. Closing their eyes against the visible anxiety, they reached for the one tool they knew could hold against the tide, the harmonized melody from the Heartstone ritual. Alara's voice rose first, a high and clear thread of light, woven not from sound alone, but from pure intention. Kale's grounding hum joined hers, the two melodies fusing into a single and resonant wave that washed over the crowded space. They poured their combined will into the song, their focus so absolute it became a tangible presence. A sphere of palpable peace solidified around the haven, softening the shouts from the street and pressing back against the internal disarray. Inside this sanctuary, breaths began to slow, the frantic movements stilled. People, guided by an instinct they did not understand, began to mimic the slow and deep rhythm of the two guides at their center. When the city's lamps flickered back to life a half-hour later, the contrast was breathtaking. Outside, the busy aftermath of the blackout continued with called questions and scattered disagreements. But inside the haven, hundreds of people stood or sat in a shared and profound quiet, their faces softened not by exhaustion, but by a collective and awe-struck relief. They had not just survived the event, they had moved beyond it. The story of the quiet room that held back the darkness, bred through the city by morning, no longer a curious tale, but a legend of practical and life-affirming power. In the calm of the following afternoon, Madame Evandra arrived at the haven alone, without her council robes. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, her aged and keen eyes taking in the serene space, then offered Alara and Kale a slow and deep bow of respect. "My skepticism is gone," she said, her voice thick with an emotion she rarely showed. "You have not just taught a practice, you have demonstrated a fundamental truth. This city needs this quiet in its bones. The council's inquiry is over. You have our full and grateful support." Madame Evandra's official decree arrived on heavy, embossed parchment, its words transforming the haven from a tolerated experiment into a cornerstone of the city's well-being. Their methods were now formally endorsed, their quiet practices integrated into the daily routines of school children and the training regimens of the city guard. It was a victory that should have felt like a final celebration, but for Alara and Kale, it introduced a new and more subtle challenge. How could they possibly scale the intimate, personal magic of their small room to meet the needs of an entire city without losing the very essence that made it work? The pressure to become an efficient institution threatened to overwhelm the delicate spark they had worked so hard to nurture. They faced the dilemma late into the night, surrounded by scrolls outlining the council's new expectations. To simply hire instructors and write a rigid curriculum felt like a betrayal, creating a hollow echo of their true purpose. The solution came to them not as a plan, but as a principle. They would not mass-produce peace. Instead, they would carefully select a small, dedicated group of their most advanced students. Individuals like Lena the Scholar and Rylon the Guard, who had not only mastered the techniques, but embodied the spirit behind them. They would train this core group not to follow a script, but to become teachers themselves, each carrying the knowledge forward in their own unique and authentic way. This decision ensured the knowledge would spread like a healthy root system, deep and wide, rather than being broadcast like a thin and fleeting signal. The moment they committed to this path, a familiar sensation washed over Alara, so gentle it was almost missed beneath the weight of their new responsibilities. It was a quiet, internal pull, a soft and persistent hum in her spirit that she had not felt since leaving the library's gates. The eternal library was calling her back. It was not a demand, but an invitation, a reminder that their work in the world was a continuous cycle of giving and receiving. To guide others, they themselves needed to return to the source, to drink from the well of wisdom that had first remade them. The daunting task of building an institution now felt lighter, framed by this greater journey. Their next step was clear. They would return to the one place that could teach them how to grow their sanctuary without ever losing its soul. The crystal in Alara's pocket pulsed with a sudden, gentle warmth as she reviewed a student's journal. She drew it out, and the small stone glowed, casting a shimmering image of the eternal library's archway of woven light onto the wall of their quiet office. The summons was clear and undeniable. They interpreted it as a request for a report on their progress, or perhaps to receive the next piece of guidance they would need for the work ahead. Yet the thought of leaving the haven, even for a short time, sent a ripple of anxiety through them. The sanctuary was still so new, its roots not yet deep in the city's trust. To depart now felt like stepping away from a fledgling bird, just as it learned to fly. But to ignore the call from the source of all their peace felt like a profound turning away, a closing of a door that must never be locked. After a long night of discussion, they made their choice. They gathered their most trusted students, Lena and Rylon, and appointed them as temporary stewards. "We are entrusting you with the heart of this place," Kale told them, his voice firm. "You are not just caretakers, you are the calm at its center." The stakes of this brief journey felt higher than any before. It confirmed that their duty was not only to the city, but to the library itself, a sacred bond that gave their worldly work its true meaning. Stepping through the familiar gate of light, they expected the profound silence they remembered. Instead, they were greeted by a new and surprising sound, the soft, harmonious murmur of many gentle voices speaking in unison. The harmonious murmur resolved into a chorus of quiet voices as they stepped fully into the library's main hall. It was filled with people, dozens of men and women, dressed in the distinct fabrics and styles of countless different cultures, stood in small clusters or sat on floating cushions of light, their conversations a low, melodic hum of shared purpose. This was the gathering of guides, and Alara and Kale stood frozen at its edge, their breath caught in their chests. They were not the only ones. A woman from a desert kingdom spoke of teaching star navigation as a form of meditation to wandering nomads. A man from a coastal city shared how he used the rhythm of the waves to help fishermen release their deep-seated worries about the unpredictable sea. Each story was more breathtaking than the last, a tapestry of global peace woven in ways they had never conceived. For a sharp, challenging moment, their own efforts in a single city felt small and clumsy. Had they truly done enough, or had they simply been tending a single, modest garden, while others cultivated entire forests? The old ghost of inadequacy, the scholar's fear of not measuring up, stirred within Alara. But the feeling had no space to grow. A guide from a mountainous region, her hair streaked with silver like high-altitude snow, turned and offered them a warm, knowing smile, gesturing for them to join the circle. The collective energy in the room was not one of competition, but of profound support, a web of mutual understanding that immediately began to mend their fleeting doubts. Emboldened by this acceptance, Kale began to speak. He shared their story not as a grand epic, but as a practical guide to finding quiet in the midst of chaos. He spoke of Captain Bren's suspicion and the council's measured inquiry, of the festival tent and the city-wide blackout, of the slow, patient work of earning trust in a place that valued noise and haste. As he spoke, others nodded with recognition, their own experiences reflected in this urban journey. Their contribution was unique, a vital piece of the puzzle on how to bring stillness to the crowded, modern world. The ancient librarian, Lyra, moved to the center of the gathering, her form shimmering with a brighter light. Your stories are not just shared wisdom, she communicated to them all, her voice a resonant feeling in their minds. They are active threads, weaving a stronger tapestry. Each life you touch, each moment of peace you foster in your world, sends a pulse of stability back to this sanctuary. Look, she gestured toward the distant Heartstone chamber. Even from here, they could feel its steady, powerful rhythm, a vibration that seemed amplified by the very presence of the guides. Their work did not just help their own communities, it was a direct source of strength for the library itself, protecting it from the external pressures that had once threatened to fracture it. The realization settled over them, a mantle of responsibility that felt not heavy, but inspiring. They were part of something vast and beautiful, a global current of calm. As the gathering drew to a close, Alara and Kale felt a renewed sense of purpose flowing through them, their spirits refreshed and their minds alight with new ideas from across the world. They were ready to return to their city, not as solitary guardians, but as connected ambassadors of a quiet, worldwide revolution. The new haven rose from a forgotten city garden, its walls woven from living willow and sun-warmed clay. Inside, the single quiet room had multiplied into a constellation of specialized sanctuaries. One chamber held only the soft sound of falling water, another the rich scent of earth from a sheltered indoor garden, and a third pulsed with the warm light of a communal hearth for shared stories. It was no longer just a refuge, but a true embassy of the library, each room a different dialect in the universal language of peace. Citizens now came not only in moments of distress, but for the daily maintenance of their inner quiet, treating the haven as essential as the public baths or the market. Its distinctive silhouette became a city landmark, a living symbol that stillness was not a luxury, but a civic right. This very success, however, brought a tide of parchment and procedure. Where once they managed a single room, they now oversaw a small institution with schedules, supplies, and a growing roster of volunteer guides. The city council, while supportive, required budgets and reports, their bureaucratic language a stark contrast to the haven's gentle hum. Ilara found herself struggling to translate the profound silence of the garden room into quarterly expenditure forecasts, while Kale had to mediate disputes over cleaning rotations, a task that felt miles away from facing the echo of anxiety. The conflict was no longer against outer doubt, but against the inner dilution of their purpose. They were at risk of becoming administrators instead of guides. Their decision was a conscious act of preservation. They would not let the heart of their sanctuary be lost under paperwork. They delegated, not as a retreat, but as a strategic expansion of trust. Lena, with her scholar's mind, took over the scheduling and correspondence, her calm precision bringing order to the chaos. Rylon managed the volunteer guides, his grounded presence and personal understanding of their struggles making him a natural leader. This freed Ilara and Kale to remain the soul of the place, circulating through the rooms to offer a quiet word, a steadying presence, or simply to sit and breathe with a visitor, ensuring the haven's compassion remained personal and immediate. Word of this urban sanctuary of quiet began to travel down trade routes and along messenger lanes. Soon, emissaries from 3 neighboring cities arrived at their door, their faces etched with the same weary haste that had once defined their own city. They came not with skepticism, but with a humble thirst, hoping to learn the methods that had softened a once frantic metropolis. The stakes had quietly escalated from healing a single community to seeding a regional transformation. As Ilara and Kale began to train these first emissaries, sharing not a rigid curriculum, but the living principles of carried peace, a profound realization settled over Ilara. She watched the foreign delegates practice, guiding each other in the garden room, their voices blending into a new harmony. Their small seed, planted in a dusty archive reading room, had not just taken root. It had grown into a mighty, sheltering tree, and they now had to learn how to tend a whole forest. The great hall's vast dome seemed to hold its breath, every seat filled with a silence more powerful than any cheer. Ilara stood at the simple wooden lectern, her hands resting lightly on its smooth surface. She did not speak of kings or conquests, of wealth gathered or empires built. Her opening words settled over the crowd like a gentle mist. "I came to you as a scholar who had forgotten how to feel," she began, her voice clear and steady. "I sought knowledge as a shield against the world, and found myself empty, armed with facts, but starved of peace." She wove the story of her journey, not as a myth, but as a human map. She spoke of the chilling doubt that met her at the cartographer's door, the unsettling weightlessness of letting her life's work fall into the mist, the fierce internal struggle of sitting in silence before the guardian. Each challenge was a step not toward power, but toward a deeper understanding of her own fragile humanity. She made the eternal library feel not like a distant fantasy, but an internal landscape every person in the hall could learn to navigate. The true treasure was not a secret location, but the courage to lay down a burden you have carried for so long you mistake it for a part of your soul. Outside the hall's heavy doors, a small but vocal group of hardline detractors shouted their protests, their words a familiar chorus of suspicion. They called her message a weakening influence, a dangerous distraction from the practical demands of life. But their cries, once so intimidating, now seemed thin and distant, a faint crackle of static against the profound, focused quiet within. The crowd's attentive silence was a wall of gentle strength, their collective presence absorbing the dissonance without a single person turning to look. Alara did not acknowledge the noise. She simply continued, her gaze sweeping across the faces before her, making each individual feel seen. She spoke of Kale, not by name, but as a fellow traveler lost in a storm of his own making, and how his healing had been the moment she truly understood her purpose. The philosophy was no longer an abstract idea. It was the living bond between two people who had chosen to face their challenges together. As she concluded, her final words were a soft invitation. The legacy we leave is not in stone monuments, but in the quiet moments we help create for one another. It is in the breath you take before you speak in anger, in the stillness you offer a friend in distress, in the peace you cultivate within your own heart that then ripples out into the world. The applause that followed was not a roaring ovation, but a deep, resonant wave of affirmation that seemed to shake the very foundations of the hall. As the sound slowly faded, her eyes found Kale's across the crowd. He stood near the back, his own quiet pride a mirror of her own. In that single, shared look, they saw not just the triumph of a single lecture, but the dawn of a lasting tradition, a flame they had kindled that would now be passed forward, from hand to hand and heart to heart, for generations to come. Soil and seeds became their next language of quiet. On a sunlit plot of land behind the new haven, Alara and Kale oversaw the planting of a public garden, its paths winding in soft spirals meant for slow, mindful walking. There were no grand statues or ornate fountains, only fragrant herbs, rustling grasses, and benches, tucked into secluded nooks under the gentle shade of willow trees. This was a living symbol of their entire philosophy, a place where people could learn the art of simply being, of existing without a purpose beyond rest. It quickly became a beloved sanctuary, a tangible piece of the eternal library's serene essence, woven directly into the city's daily fabric. You could feel its influence, a subtle hum of peace that softened the sharp edges of urban life for anyone who stepped inside its green embrace. Yet this tranquility was not self-sustaining. The garden's peaceful atmosphere demanded constant, gentle vigilance against the city's relentless noise and haste. A boisterous group of apprentices might try to use a quiet corner for a loud debate, or a hurried courier would see its winding paths as a frustrating shortcut, their frantic energy leaving a wake of disrupted calm. The conflict was no longer a dramatic confrontation, but a persistent, low-level challenge to the sanctuary's delicate spirit. Alara and Kale realized they could not stand as its only protectors. To truly belong to the city, the garden needed to be nurtured by the city itself. They made a pivotal decision, instituting a rotating schedule where their advanced students, and even ordinary citizens, could volunteer to act as garden guardians for a few hours each week. These guardians did not enforce rules with stern authority, but simply modeled the garden's intended use, sitting in quiet meditation or offering a gentle smile to visitors, their calm presence a living reminder of the space's purpose. This fostered a profound sense of communal ownership, transforming the garden from a place people visited into a responsibility they shared and loved. As the garden thrived under this collective care, its reputation began to spread far beyond the city walls. It became a destination, drawing pilgrims from distant lands who had heard whispers of a place where one could sit beneath a willow and feel the weight of the world lift from their shoulders. These travelers arrived with a deep thirst in their eyes, and they often left with a new light in them, carrying seeds of the same quiet practices back to their own communities. The stakes of their work had quietly escalated once more, their local sanctuary now having a regional and even global resonance. One afternoon, Alara watched a young family she did not recognize sitting together on a stone bench. The parents were silent, their hands loosely clasped, while their child slept peacefully in the mother's arms, lulled by the whisper of the leaves. In that simple, unguarded moment, Alara felt a profound and gentle certainty settle within her. The cycle was complete. The rest they had worked so hard to find was now being given, received, and renewed, a self-sustaining current of peace that would flow long after they were gone. The gentle rustle of turning pages in the Haven's central library was now a chorus of familiar voices, each guiding another. Alara watched from a sunlit alcove as Lena, once a hesitant student, knelt beside a young man whose restless energy mirrored her own from years past. Lena's voice was a soft, steady murmur, her hands resting calmly in her lap as she demonstrated the breathing pattern, her entire presence a living lesson in patience. Across the room, Rylon guided a small group of new city guards, his instructions grounded in the practical realities of patrols and peaceful communication. The knowledge was replicating itself, a quiet echo passed from one heart to the next in an unbroken circle that no longer relied solely on them. A deep, profound gratitude washed over Alara, so immense it felt like a physical warmth in her chest. Yet, intertwined with that joy was a subtle, persistent tension, the quiet concern that this delicate ecosystem they had nurtured could still be affected by a single misstep. She noticed Kale's fingers twitching as he watched another of their students guide a meditation, his body leaning forward almost imperceptibly as if to correct a minor adjustment in tone. The urge to step in, to ensure every detail was perfect, was a powerful, instinctual pull. They had to make a conscious choice, to trust that the wisdom they had shared was now its own living entity, capable of growing and adapting without their direct hands. The decision, when they made it, felt less like a letting go and more like the final, necessary lesson in their own journey. They called a quiet gathering of all their students in the Willow Garden. Under the gentle, swaying branches, Alara and Kale did not give a long speech. They simply placed their hands on Lena's and Rylon's shoulders, a silent, physical transfer of stewardship. "We are not leaving you," Kale said, his voice firm yet warm. "We are stepping beside you. The Haven is yours to lead, to shape, and to protect." The relief that followed was immediate, a weight lifting not just from their own shoulders, but from the entire community, which now fully embraced its own maturity. This seamless transition was the ultimate safeguard, the final piece that ensured their sanctuary would endure for generations, its future secured beyond the limits of any single lifetime. With their primary work complete and their legacy living in the capable hands of their students, A familiar sensation began to stir in their spirits, a soft, resonant hum that had been waiting patiently beneath the busyness of leadership. The eternal library was calling them home, not as weary seekers in need of rest, but as honored guests returning to the source of all their understanding. The Heartstone pulsed with a slow, steady rhythm, its light a deep and welcoming gold. This time, Elara and Kale did not approach it with tools or a ritual song, but with empty hands and full hearts. They stood before the great crystal, not as petitioners or menders, but as partners. Lyra watched from the periphery, her form a quiet shimmer of approval, her presence a silent witness to this final, meaningful exchange. Elara placed her palm upon the cool, smooth surface, and Kale laid his hand beside hers. The connection was immediate, a resonance that traveled up their arms and settled deep within their spirits. They did not push or pull energy, they simply opened themselves, becoming conduits for a river of lived experience. They poured into the Heartstone the quiet courage of the student facing her examination, the weary relief of the baker finding her first full night of sleep, the steadfast resolve of the guard choosing calm over conflict. They offered the shared breath of the festival crowd, the profound silence of the garden, the grateful tears of parents watching their child rest. Every story of resilience, every hard-won moment of peace from their city, every life gently touched by their sanctuary, flowed through them and into the crystal. It was a final, selfless act, the ultimate release of their personal journey into the library's eternal keeping. The Heartstone began to drink it in, its light brightening from a steady gold to a brilliant, vibrant white. It did not flare and fade, but swelled, growing in intensity and depth, until the entire chamber was bathed in a radiance that felt both ancient and entirely new. This was not a restoration of old magic, but an evolution. The crystal now held within its core the living proof that the library's wisdom could not only be found, but could be cultivated and gifted back, creating a cycle of renewal that would sustain the sanctuary for centuries to come. As the light slowly settled into a permanent, gentle glow, Elara and Kale felt a profound completion, a gentle clicking into place of their soul's final purpose. They had not just saved the library, they had become a permanent part of its story, their experiences now woven into the very fabric of its endless wisdom, lasting pillars in a sanctuary of rest. The world's dusty roads and the library's silent halls became the two chambers of a single, breathing heart for Elara and Kale. They chose not a final home, but a path of perpetual movement, becoming roving guides who understood that the journey to peace is different for every soul. To a merchant in a bustling port, overwhelmed by the noise of ledgers and contracts, Kale might share the simple anchor of counting breaths between the crashing waves. To a young artist in a quiet village, feeling uncertain before an empty canvas, Elara might sit and speak of the library's Hall of Whispers, where the first mark is not about skill, but about the courage to begin. They carried no grand title, only a deep and quiet knowing in their eyes that signaled to the weary, here is someone who understands. Their greatest offering was this recognition, the simple act of seeing a person's hidden exhaustion and reflecting back to them their own capacity for calm. The haven they had founded was no longer their responsibility, but their living legacy. It thrived under Lena's thoughtful leadership and Rylon's steady guardianship, its halls constantly filled with the soft murmur of learning and the profound quiet of shared respite. It had become a true center, a beacon that proved a community could choose to prioritize its collective well-being, that a city's strength could be measured not only by its walls, but by the peace in its people's hearts. The memory of the eternal library slowly transformed in the world's consciousness. It was no longer a whispered secret for a lucky few, but a universal truth, a shared understanding that every person carries within them a quiet room where the soul can rest. Parents taught their children to find it before sleep. Friends reminded one another of its presence in times of hardship, and the very idea became a common language for a need everyone understood. Elara and Kale found their own unique form of rest, not in seeking a final stillness, but in the endless, joyful rhythm of their work. Each life they touched, each spark of peace they helped kindle, was a renewal of their own spirit. Their personal journey, which began with a single weary scholar and a single faded map, had blossomed far beyond themselves. It had become a perpetual gift, a self-sustaining cycle where the light they passed forward was now carried by countless hands, ensuring that the quiet sanctuary would never fade, but only grow stronger with every shared breath and every act of gentle courage.